Chapter 5. Focus and Resolve. Despite the late night, John was awake by 8 a.m. For a few seconds he was completely disorientated by his surroundings. Then memory came flooding back. He felt heavy-hearted because he knew he could not pursue any kind of bonding with Ellie Mae. It would be too unfair to cause her so much pain and heartbreak, not to mention the fact that it would totally destroy all of his plans. He got dressed and went to the living room, where he had remembered seeing a notepad and pen by the phone. He wrote a note explaining that he was going out of state on business for a while and hoped to see her again on his return, again thanking her for a wonderful evening. He folded the note and placed it in the middle of the coffee table. As he did this, he remembered his own note on his own table. It felt like that was such a long time ago, but the rage started to build as the memories engulfed his mind. As quietly as he could, he left the house and headed back to where he would find a cab to get home. The rest of the day was a mess of conflicting emotions. On one hand, he had this wonderful woman who had come into his life like a ray of sunshine. She had shown so much understanding of his loneliness and pain, and she had made him feel wanted for the first time in a long time. And he too felt the strong pull of mutual attraction, both physical and emotional. On the other hand was his master plan to show the world of gaming that you cannot screw your customers and remain unpunished. The darkness in his head was seeming stronger than any desire for love or intimacy. He resolved to stay out of the public eye, at least for a few days, while he fought to control head over heart. This was turning out to be much more difficult and complex than he first thought. Forcing all thoughts of Ellie Mae from his mind, he turned to his laptop and continued his research. He studied the plans and schematics for the target building, and he learned a lot. He studied various chemical reactions involving water, and he knew how he would seal the building from external access on the final day. But still he needed to figure out how to deploy that part of the plan, but he was confident that it would work. Now it was time for him to start listing his grievances in detail and scripting the final day. And just like his passion for cooking, he knew presentation is everything. Over the coming months, he sourced all the equipment he was going to need. The list seemed endless. And all in all, he spent over $600,000. He had spread his purchases out over as many different outlets as possible so not to attract too much attention. The sheer quantity of firearms and ammunition that he bought was enough in itself to raise concerns had he not been in Texas, and had he not spread them across over 70 retailers. During this time, he had allowed himself to meet up with Ellie Mae about once every month, always being careful to time his visits to coincide with her work shifts. The friendship blossomed, but he was always careful to avoid any level of romance. They had not hugged since that first time, nor had he returned to her home at any point. Instead, he kept everything on an almost business level. He was very much aware that she had very definite romantic notions towards him, as she had regularly asked if they would ever get the chance to go out to dinner or a movie. And though she had never used the word date, he knew that that was what she wanted. He fought hard to control his emotions where she was concerned. He knew that he could fall in love with her so very easily, and he knew that she was experiencing similar thoughts and emotions. But he was able to keep it all at arm's length with constant business trips and the like. In truth, most of his alleged business trips were actually him not leaving the farmhouse and letting her believe he was out of state. This constantly made him feel bad, as he was not comfortable telling lies. especially to Ellie Mae. She was everything any man could ever want, and he was the man that she wanted. In a different life, they would have been so happy together, but in this life, it would never be. The darkness in his head seemed to mock the longing in his heart, but he didn't mind too much. Most of his life he'd felt awkward around the opposite sex, and the voices in his head had mocked for as long as he could remember. This was familiar territory, and as such, easy to ignore. He had converted one of the bedrooms into what he liked to think of as his war room, looking just like all those films he'd watched. Plans and blueprints were hung on the walls with big thumbtacks. The bed had been moved to one side, and an old kitchen table from the barn now occupied centre stage, covered with notes and printouts. He even had a scaled-down model of the building, with pieces of string attached to various floors, leading out to pieces of paper with notes written on them. This was his script, and he would follow it to the letter. In a brief moment of clarity, it dawned on him that their last day in this world would ultimately be his last day as well. And the fact that he was okay with this thought sent a shiver through him like he had never felt before. The darkness in him bristled with anticipation. It was like there were two people living inside one brain. When he slept, on those rare occasions when he dreamt of Ellie Mae. He dreamt of a world where they met under better circumstances, a world where they fell in love and had a life together. Marriage, children, the whole 9 yards, as she would probably have put it. But then he would be awake, and the darkness would rear up in his head like a malevolent creature. It always felt like half of him was laughing at his pain and loneliness, taunting him, baiting him. And when the internal cacophony became unbearable, a soothing thought would wash through him, almost a whisper. It'll all be over soon. No more pain, no more anger or anguish. Finish the plan, find some peace. Soon all of this won't matter. These thoughts were the start of every day since the first night they had met. His plans were now complete, requiring only his presence in New York City 3 days from now to set the last day into motion. Everything was in place, and he knew the world would never forget him once the day was done. He had triple-checked everything, and now all there was for him to do was wait 72 more hours until his internal flight from Dallas to LaGuardia. Then it was a 30-minute taxi ride to the beginning of the end. His thoughts again went to Ellie Mae, and the rage just simmered quietly in the background. After all, it could do no more now, not for 3 days. Curiously, it felt like he was being encouraged to think of her. He proffered the thought that he could have one last romantic evening before everything went to hell. Still, the rage just simmered quietly. He briefly entertained the notion that it wasn't too late. He could make it all safe again and pursue happiness. He caught his own reflection in the mirror. It was like staring at a stranger. And knowing only bad things were coming, he avoided his own gaze. It unsettled him. He could see what nobody else could see. He could see what was really there. He parked his pickup in the town car park and walked to the bar where Ellie Mae worked. He knew she would not be there this early, but that was okay. It wasn't her he wanted to see. In fact, it was her employer he was seeking. He went to great lengths to secure a night off for her, explaining that he was going away for business in 3 days and that he really wanted to take her on a proper date before he went, as he was unsure when he would be back. After some fairly easy persuasion and a $50 bill, the deal was struck and John left the bar happy. He looked at his watch. It was just 10 a.m. Ellie May will most likely be only just getting up about now, he thought to himself. So he headed towards the shops instead of her house, because courtesy dictated that he give her time to get up properly and be ready for visitors before he ventured near her home. As he passed a dress shop, his eye was caught by a beautiful evening gown. In his mind's eye, he pictured the dress on Ellie May, and she looked stunning. On an impulse, he entered the shop and was greeted by a lady in her mid-50s. "Can I help you, sir?" said the shop assistant. He went on to explain about his plans to give Ellie May a wonderful evening before he left on business, and wondered if the lady knew her well enough to know her dress size. The lady beamed at him and told him that yes, she knew her that well, and the dress that he had seen was in fact her size. Without a moment's hesitation, he made the purchase and left the shop, with the lady being so happy for her. Bless her, she could do with a nice man like you to show her some love. She was still chattering away long after he had closed the shop door. Next, he went to the shoe shop and gave them the same story, showed them the dress, and procured the shoes to match it. Then he got himself a coffee at a cafe and pondered how the rest of the day might go. Now it was 11 a.m. and he was ringing Ellie May's doorbell. She answered with a huge smile when she realised it was John. "Hey you," she said. "I wasn't expecting to see you today. What's the occasion?" "Ellie May, I have a proposition for you," said John. "I have negotiated a night off for you. With pay," he added. "And it would be my utmost privilege if I could take you out for dinner, or maybe a movie." "Really?" she said. "Or are you making fun of me? Because I've said I'd like to go to dinner with you 100 times before, and you just never seemed that interested. I was beginning to think you weren't interested in me at all." "Hand on heart, I promise you I am not making fun of you," said John with absolute earnest. "And at the risk of seeming a bit forward, I also come bearing gifts for the lady." "You brought me a present," she said with surprise in her voice. "You didn't need to do that." "I know I didn't," he said, "but I want tonight to be truly memorable for us both, so I did it anyway." She smiled. "Well, don't just stand there. Come on in. I'll get some real coffee on for us both." He followed her into the kitchen and sat on one of the 2 stools at the breakfast bar. "Would you like to see your gift now?" he asked as he placed the boxes on the counter. "Can I?" she said. "I think that'd be just swell." He gestured so that she could open the boxes, and she did. She could barely contain her excitement at the dress. "I know where you got this from," she said. "I've been admiring it for a while now. How did you know?" Lucky guess, to be honest, but I have to concede. I had to cheat a little and rely on the local knowledge to get the size right. Open the other one. "Oh my Lord, you got me shoes as well," she exclaimed. And with an impish grin, she added, "Are you hitting on me?" John smiled. "Yes, my lady. Today I am, as you like to say, hitting on you." "Well, how would you put it?" she said with mock sternness and hands on hips. John thought for a moment and then stood up and approached Ellie May. He looked deep into her eyes, cleared his throat, and said, "Ellie May Franklin, I would very much like to take you out for a romantic evening. If dinner is what you would like, then dinner is what we shall have. If a movie is what you like, a movie is where we shall go. I would like for you to tell me what would be your ideal evening so that I can make it real. Because I can truly say I have never in my life met anyone quite like you. And it is my sincerest wish to treat you like a princess so that you know my feelings are true. And if by the end of the night I may make so bold as to steal just one kiss, then all of my efforts will have been rewarded 1,000 times over. Ellie Mae was stunned into silence. She stood there motionless for a moment, and then John saw tears forming in her eyes. But before he could react, she threw herself into his arms and buried her face in his chest. "That is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me," she said through the tears. "And I would love a romantic evening with you more than anything in the whole world." They embraced in silence for what seemed like hours, but in actuality was probably not even a minute. But in that time, he was awash with emotions. Her touch, her warmth, her smell. All of these things conspired to bring him to tears also. But then they were interrupted. The kettle whistled shrilly on the stove and broke the moment. Ellie Mae stepped away and turned off the gas while grabbing a small towel and wiping her eyes. "Look at the state of me," she said. "Anyone would think I'd never been asked on a date before." John smiled at this and said, "Pray tell, fair maiden, what would be thy heart's desire on this truly wondrous day?" She shivered visibly and murmured, "For you to keep talking that way." Instantly she blushed at her own words. "I'm sorry," she said. "That was meant to stay in my head." "It's all right, really. I find it so refreshing that soft words and kind gestures are still in demand. The women back in England are so coarse and vulgar by comparison these days, often swearing so much more than the men." Ellie Mae looked genuinely shocked to hear this. "Really?" she said. "I heard of women like that in the big cities before, but I don't really get it. There's no need to make yourself look so cheap in my mind. Although I have to be honest, if I get riled up enough, I have been known to swear occasionally, like the last time my baby brother crashed my car and then asked me for taxi money to go see his tramp. Well, I just upped and told him to fuck off." Her hands flew straight to her mouth as if to try to catch the words and unsay them. John laughed deeply and genuinely. He really could not believe his good fortune in meeting this beautiful, wonderful woman. She made everything that little bit nicer just by being there. And in the back of his head, he was sure he heard, no, not heard, felt. In the back of his mind, he felt something completely without humour, laughing softly at him, reminding him that he was going to have to tell Ellie Mae that he was leaving in a couple of days. "You do that a lot too," said Ellie Mae. John looked momentarily confused and she continued, "One second you look so happy that your whole face lights up. And then something happens in your head and your eyes get real sad all of a sudden. I don't mean nothing by it. I just hate the thought of you being sad, what with us finally going on a date and all. And I just want tonight to be perfect for both of us is all." "And I am certain it will be just that," he said. "Perfect in every detail, I am sure. Have you decided what we are to do on our date yet?" "I'm working on it," she grinned. "Let's have our coffee in the sitting room," she added, changing the subject. But not to put off, John pressed further. "Can I at least ask you how you would like to see me dressed for our evening?" "Well," she said, "you have got me the most beautiful dress to wear, so I think it's only fair that you get dressed up too. Do you have a suit? I mean, I'm sure you do and all, but you know, you might not." "I'm afraid, at this precise moment in time, I am quite suitless. But if you would be so kind as to accompany me into town, I'm sure we can rectify the situation." Ellie Mae clapped her hands with joy. "I would be honoured to help you choose a suit truly I would. They chatted away happily while they had their coffee, and then it was lunchtime, so Ellie Mae fixed them some cold meat and some salad and more coffee. Then they went suit shopping. As they came out of the shop, Ellie Mae looked up at the town clock and said, "Oh my Lord, is that the time?" She looked at John and said, "I have to go home and get ready. Now, I don't know what you intend to do while I'm busy, but you can't be at my house while I'm getting ready. No, sir. Because if you saw what we women are like when we're getting ready to go out, like as not, you'd run down the road tearing your hair out, and I can't risk that." "Well, if you accompany to the car park, I'll drop you off at your house, and I'll go home to execute the male rituals of a night out," he said, smiling. "Well, thank you, kind sir. That would be just fine of you," she said, with that exaggerated Southern Belle accent. As they walked, she slipped her arm through his and skipped a little to get into step with him. They soon arrived at his pickup, and in no time at all he had dropped her off and was headed back to the farm to get ready for his last ever date. They had agreed that he would come to the house at 8 p.m. and not a second before, and that he should put his faith in her to have everything organised regarding the fine details of the date. This he was happy to do, as when all is said and done, she knew far more about this town than he did. Now, as he watched the final seconds roll round to 8 o'clock, he pressed the doorbell and almost jumped when the door opened instantly. "I saw you pull up," she smiled, "and I watched you wait until it was the right time to ring the bell, too," she added. John stood and absorbed the incredible vision in front of him now. "Wow," he said. He searched for proper words, but all he could find was, "You look... wow." "Oh, stop it," she said. "You're making me blush. Just come on in. You're letting the chill in." John entered the house, still struggling to form words. Ellie Mae looked absolutely stunning in her new dress. Its deep red cloth complementing her complexion, its figure-hugging style and its plunge neckline looked as if it had been made especially for her. She had done her hair, or had it done, beautifully, with her flowing blonde locks curled to look exactly like those Southern belles of times gone by. And with the shoes on, she was only an inch or two shorter than he was. "You are truly the most beautiful woman I have ever had the privilege to lay eyes on," he said, finally finding words again. "From my heart, I mean it. You take my breath away." "Well, sir, I do believe you are trying to flatter me for your own devilish purpose." Again, that Southern Belle accent. "I do declare you will be the ruination of my good name." But she couldn't keep it up and started laughing. John took her by the hands and pulled her close. They looked deeply into each other's eyes, and then they kissed. Softly at first, their lips barely touching, tiny little shocks like low-level electricity causing them both to tingle as they parted again. "Oh my," said Ellie Mae, catching her breath. "Where did you learn to do that?" John faltered momentarily. "I think you just taught me," he said, his head still reeling from the sensations he had experienced. "Follow me," she said. "I have a surprise for you." She glided towards the kitchen. In his head, he could hear strains of that old 60s classic, Poetry in Motion. He followed her and was indeed surprised. She had somehow transformed what he knew to be a regular functional kitchen into a romantic restaurant for two. There were candles and roses in the centre of the table, and a striking dark green tablecloth. She seemed to have got out the best china and cutlery as well. The setting was as perfect as any five-star restaurant could ever hope to achieve. But this was better, because she had done all this herself, as well as finding time to look incredible. "This is amazing," whispered John softly. "You are amazing. You look incredible, and this," he said, giving a sweeping gesture to the room, "this looks perfect." "Well, I told you to have faith in me, didn't I?" she said. "I'm really glad you like it, and I hope you like steak. It's the one thing I can cook good. I learned it from my mama when I was still a kid, and it kinda stuck with me." "I adore a good steak," he replied, "and I am sure this night will be just perfect. Is there anything I can do to help? I mean, you've done so much, I feel I should do something." "You could open the wine if you wouldn't mind. I always struggle with the corkscrew. I didn't know which you preferred, so there's white in the refrigerator and there's red on the side there, 'cause I know not to put red in the fridge while we're working in a bar and all." Well, popular etiquette would have us believe that we should have red wine with steak, but to be honest, I would rather have the white. He saw relief spread across her face. "Thank heaven for that," she said. "I'm not keen on the red stuff either. Kinda makes my teeth feel furry, but I got it in case you liked it." He opened the wine and poured them both a glass. "We should have a toast," she said. "What should we drink to?" he asked. She raised her glass to his and said, "To a perfect first date." He tapped her glass to his. "To a perfect first date," he echoed. It was indeed a perfect first date, or at least as close to perfect as anyone could ever hope for. The meal was delicious. The steak was melt in your mouth tender, with a fine selection of roasted vegetables and greens. And for dessert, she'd gone all out to make the American legend that is apple pie with cinnamon, and a choice of ice cream or custard. She was happy to discover that he favoured ice cream over custard, as she did too, and it meant she didn't need to make the custard. After they had finished eating, Ellie Mae looked at him and said, "Do you like to dance at all?" "Disco or ballroom," he said, grinning. "'Cause I have to tell you, if it's disco you're looking for, the answer is a resounding no. But if you mean ballroom, I would love to trip the light fantastic with you." "Well, we're hardly dressed for a square dance," she said, "but if you'd help me move the table to one side, I would like to dance with you." John moved the table for her while she put a CD in the player. He asked what they would be dancing to, but she told him to wait and see. But as a clue, she told him it was some homegrown music from the 40s. Then she went round and turned off all the lights in the house, until all that was left was the candles on the table. She pressed play and stood in front of John, smiling. He heard the first note of the music and instantly knew that it was Moonlight Serenade. "Glenn Miller," he said, "the perfect choice." They danced together, surprisingly well, given that it was their first time. He led well, and she followed equally well. Resting her head against his shoulder, she sighed happily. He held her closer. Right now, it didn't matter what the future held. All that mattered was this moment, right now. They held each other and they danced. He wanted to tell her right there and then that he had fallen in love, but he did not dare. He thought briefly of what was coming, and again she picked up on it. "There it is again," she said softly. The sadness. I wish I knew what it was, so that I could take it away. I don't want this night to end, he whispered. But I have to fly to New York in 2 days, as I have something very important I need to take care of. And truthfully, I don't know how it's going to pan out or how long I will be gone for. She absorbed the information and held him tighter than ever. They danced out the end of Moonlight Serenade and they parted from each other. She curtsied to him and he bowed to her. He could now see the same sadness in her eyes as in his own. Finally, she responded to what he had said. Please stay with me tonight. Everything is so perfect, and while we can't stop our date from ending, we can surely make it last as long as possible. She held her breath as she waited for his response. If you're sure that is what you want, I don't think anything could make me happier, he said. Once more they kissed, and once more for both of them. It was electrifying. If you don't mind, I would like to change into something comfy, she said. I mean, the dress is really beautiful and all, but my feet are starting to object to these shoes, which is my own fault, because I've been wearing them for hours now, but I feel bad, because you don't have a change of clothes here. He silenced her with the lightest touch of his lips to hers and said, Actually, it's in my nature to prepare for all eventualities. And whilst I was not expecting to be asked to stay, I figured it was a possibility, even if only because we would have drunk a bottle of wine between us. I have an overnight bag out in the truck. Is that bad of me? Not at all, she said. In fact, if you would get my zip for me, I'll go and change while you get your bag. He undid her zip as she requested and went out to his truck to fetch his overnight bag. He sat in the truck for a few moments and gathered his thoughts. Am I doing the right thing here, he thought to himself. And after an agonising 30 seconds or so, he consoled himself with the thought, I'm not doing anything wrong. When he came back in, she was wearing her PJs with the clouds on and her fluffy gown, just like the first time he'd stayed there. I'm really sorry, she said, but I don't own any sexy lingerie. I've been single for so long now, I just never saw the point. But darling Ellie, you still don't get it, do you? Get what? She said. You. You don't seem to realise how beautiful you are. I mean, you could turn up wearing a big black bin bag and still be the most beautiful girl in the building. I'm the only girl in the building, silly, she said, smiling. I mean any building, anywhere in the world, he said, with a straight face. She put her arms round his waist and kissed him on the cheek. Make love to me, she whispered in his ear. Please. If you are sure, he started to say, but she cut him off. I am sure. I've never been more sure about anything, so stop asking me if I'm sure. Make love to me. They went to the bedroom. Her room this time, not the guest room. It was very pretty, very feminine, just how he imagined it would be, with the deep plush carpet that guilted him into removing his shoes before setting foot on it. You really are so considerate, she said, as she slipped off her dressing gown and hung it on the back of the door. I just hope my feet don't smell, he said jokingly. He was feeling very nervous about what was going to happen next. He hadn't been with a woman intimately for quite some time. His thoughts went back to Maggie, and it occurred to him that in the last 2 years before the breakup, They'd spent hardly any time in the same room, let alone in the same bed. Due to his insomnia and her work hours, for nearly 2 years he had been going to bed as she was getting up for the day. He removed his suit jacket and folded it carefully over the back of the chair in front of Ellie's dressing table. She came over to him and started unbuttoning his shirt, kissing his chest softly as each button was undone. He reciprocated by slowly undoing her pyjama top to expose her truly stunning body. They kissed and caressed and undressed each other with an ease and comfort that would have suggested they had been lovers for years. Now, both naked and on the bed, he could see how truly beautiful Ellie Mae really was. And she equally enjoyed what she found when she saw him. And they made love. And that is what it was. It wasn't sex, not the fumbling, overexcitable sex he'd known in the past, nor the going through the motions to keep her happy sex that he had remembered with Maggie. They explored each other's bodies intimately with kisses and caresses. At one point, Ellie Mae said to him, "Is it wrong of me to say I am falling for you? Because if it is, then I want to be wrong." He hadn't answered verbally as she was kissing him passionately now. He reciprocated the attention and figured that was probably answer enough. Eventually, after many wonderful hours, they were both too tired to continue and just lay in each other's arms, basking in the glow they were both feeling. John looked at her and said, "If I was to tell you it has never been like this before, would you think me strange?" "I would certainly wonder how you became such an incredible lover," she said. "But no, not strange." "Oh my," she suddenly exclaimed, "the sun is coming up and we haven't slept yet." She smiled broadly and said, "I told you was going to bring about my ruination, didn't I? All I can say is thank heaven I phoned in and got today off as well." He put on a mock southern accent of his own and said, "Well, I do declare, Miss Franklin, I believe you was planning to seduce me all along, and that means you were going after my ruination and not the other way round." They both giggled. They cuddled up close, and she snuggled into his neck, planting little kisses along his collarbone. He, in turn, wrapped her up in his arms and gently kissed the top of her head. Simultaneously, they fell asleep. It was early afternoon when they got up to face the day, and there was a very emotional farewell when it was time for John to leave. John left.